Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Prairie Podcast. It's so wonderful to have you join us today, no matter who you are, whether you're a student, whether you're a prospective student, whether you're a parent of a student, maybe you're working here at Prairie, or you work at a different organization, because we're okay with that. We're okay if you work somewhere else other than Prairie. But no matter who you are, we're happy that you're here with us because we've got an excellent guest with us, one of our own professors, someone who didn't make it on the first season, but I'm happy to have on the second season, Dr. Mike Schmidt. So, Mike, why don't you introduce yourself for us? Tell us a bit about who you are and give us that framework, and then we'll head from there.
All right. So, as you said, my name is Mike Schmidt. I am married to Lorraine. We have been married for 30 some years now. We have two children, a boy and a girl. Not really boys and girls, they're grown children in their careers already. And for as far as background, before I came here, Lorraine and I, some of the big things we did, we were missionaries in Niger in West Africa and did that. That's what prepared us to come here and to be, for myself to come and to be as the director of the Intercultural Studies program.
Okay, awesome, wonderful. Thanks for that little quick snapshot there. Just so we get to know a little bit more about you, I'd love to hear a boring fact. This is something new I'm going to ask people. For example, boring fact about myself is that I like to draw maps. Do you have a boring fact for us about yourself?
Yeah, one of my boring facts drives my wife nuts is that I really just like to drink water. It's the only thing I drink. All the
Can
rest
attest to
of it,
that.
I'll drink it if I need to be social to drink something else. But uh, really, all I want is water. Doesn't even have to be cold.
Wonderful. Okay, there we go. So you like water and you teach intercultural studies. So, thinking about your work here at Prairie, I think we'd be curious just to get a look at what are some of the things that you're doing in your role. You've got your classes, and maybe you want to touch on that. But I know there's a lot of other things that you do in your position here at Prairie. Would you mind explaining some of that for us?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of side things that you do as the director of intercultural studies that often a lot of times take over, and sometimes it feels like, yeah, that teaching, that's what I do on the side. The biggest of which is the study abroad program, the what we call Globe Trek,
Yeah.
and it is just such a massive program. It's a unique program, and so it's one that I'm really excited to be a part of, but it also drives you crazy because it is an 8 month study abroad program in which the students will go into every major ethno religious bloc around the world. So they, in those 8 months, will go around the world. And they will do these internships and just setting that up and doing all the coordination with it, especially in today's world where things are getting a little more tense and visas are more restricted. They're checking on those kind of things more. It's just a lot more work to get that done. So that's a major project. And then, this year we're doing something even more unique to Globe
Hmm.
Trek is that we're sending a videographer along with the students. And,
Okay.
and that's the unique thing about the program is that it's 20, 21-year-olds traveling the world by themselves. There's no professors, no staff with them. This year we will be sending a videographer with them, but that just adds another whole layer of complexity.
Yeah.
So,
Okay, very cool. So I know, yeah, Globe Trek tends to eat up quite a bit of time, but it's also a really wonderful project. I did it myself under your guidance and leadership too. So I will give you a 10 out of 10. Of
well, thank you.
course. Okay, but in your time here as a professor, you maybe, it's been a couple years. Was it 4 or 5
4 years now.
4 years now? I'm curious, you're a bit of a storyteller, and so I'm sure you've got some stories for us. Do you have like kind of a favorite memory, something that's really stands out to you? This was a fun time at Prairie that it's a story that keeps coming up again and again.
Yeah, I mean, there's probably one that sort of a shocking story for me. It's very short. The idea, I spent, I in the summers, I will work with disaster relief with
Hmm.
Samaritan's Purse. It's something I do to keep going into new cultures. And when I returned from Grenada after the hurricane, I'll never forget walking into my office and I was almost waist deep in balloons. The whole office was filled with balloons. And like I say, it went up to, like mid thigh to waist deep in places. I think it was, over 1,000 balloons. I mean, it was just one of those where you're stunned and you sit there and you just think, why did somebody do this? But anyway, that was a fun memory. I think, one that, as far as like, one where I sat back and I just said, wow, this is really interesting. It was my very first year of launching the Globe Trekkers.
Hmm.
and I took them to the airport to send them off on their round the world. And because of a crazy COVID, it was the COVID year. And so they all had to have COVID tests. And we got there where I was sending them in Eastern Europe. They marked the whatever many hours it was for the validity of the test from the time they got their results, not when they took the test, not when they were arriving. It was based off of when they received the results. Well, we couldn't time that. And so we ended up being like 3 hours outside the window, and the airline wouldn't let us on. And I
Oh,
thought, oh my goodness, here I am, the brand new professor with launching my very first Globe Trek team to go around the world, and I can't get them on the plane in Calgary. How's this going to build confidence? And I remember the team, they were sitting down in the Calgary airport and just looking at me. And I had the people in Serbia on my cell phone, and on a payphone, I was talking to the travel agent to see what we could do. So I had phone in both ears doing that, and they were there taking pictures of me and doing that. Now you fast forward 6 months, and I met this team after they'd uh, done a month of travel and then 6 months of internship, and we all met up in
hmm.
Israel. And one of the students, as they were getting off, got interrogated by the immigration at the airport there for like 2.5, 3 hours. So we were going to get in at like 11. Now we've been delayed. And so we get to Jerusalem to try to find our lodging. And it was, I don't know, 1:30, 2 o'clock in the
Wow,
morning.
yeah.
And then I realized that, who I'd set up where we were going to stay had given me a map, but the map really wasn't accurate at all. In fact, it was so inaccurate we had no idea what to do. So it's 2 a.m. in the morning. We're in Old Jerusalem, and we don't know where we're going to stay. And I remember thinking, well, it's not that cold. We'll just stay outside. And then it started to rain. And I thought, okay, bad plan there. And remembering where that team was when we ran into the first problem, that team kind of just kicked into action,
Hmm.
and they started to solve the problem, and to the point where all they needed from me was that I had the only phone with data, and so they needed a hotspot. And they assigned different tasks of how they were going to solve this problem and do it. And it was amazing. Like 40 minutes later, with like 90% certainty, we went and knocked on a door to try to find the Maronite monastery guest house, and a very sleepy nun came out, and sure enough, we had found the right house.
Wow.
And I just thought, wow, that was a fun moment to say like how just helpless they were back in Calgary. And then 6 months later, it's kind of like, Mike, if you can give us a hotspot, we're good. You can just sit there and do nothing, and they could
They
solve those
figured
kind
it
of
out.
problems. Yeah, it was just wonderful.
That's an incredible story, and I think that speaks to some of the mission of what you're doing, or what kind of what the goals mean, not Prairie in general, but in your work is, these students who maybe they haven't had to face challenges like that before, and most people don't.
No,
But an experience like Globe Trek, you go through circumstances like that repeatedly that you start problem solving and risk management and working that through. So that's an awesome. Thanks for sharing that story. That's a
yeah,
great story. Okay, so you mentioned at the start your time before Prairie. We're gonna come back to you. We're gonna leave Prairie behind.
okay.
I'm curious. Would you mind giving us the story of the journey? I know you were in Niger for many years. Be as short or as long as you want. I'd love to hear some of that testimony, some of that background. What's the life of Mike been like?
Yeah, it was, I wasn't headed into missions when I would say coming out of high school.
Mhm.
It was during my college years that God really grabbed me
Hmm.
and just said, "What is your life going to count for?" And it was a tough decision to say, "Yeah, I'm leaving these dreams behind. I'm going to follow this." And it, kind of has that idea of Abraham
Hmm.
leaving. I'm going to literally, both he and I were going to a country we didn't know,
Yeah.
and yet we knew, that's where God was calling me. And it was one of those things from the very beginning, as God called. I remember as I was cleaning out my dorm room at the end of a year, that year I made that decision, and I found a bunch of papers that were kind of my plan of what it had been. And I remember looking at them and said, yeah, that's an interesting plan, I guess, for somebody else, but not for me.
Mm.
And it was like all that I had thought was so important to me. It was like that whole pathway, career path. It was just like, yeah, I wouldn't want to do that.
No.
And so, it was God confirming that I was headed there. And I it was through my short-term trip during my undergrad where God took me to the Philippines, and I ended up meeting some students from Jordan, and that was my first interaction face to face with people from an Islamic background, and that's where I felt the call. Like these are the kinds of people you're going to work with.
Mm.
But once you've narrowed it down to the Islamic world, well, that's not really narrowing it down.
No.
That's a very big region in the world. And so, I continued to try to explore, okay, God, where in this world would you have me go? And it was through a presentation by a mission rep talking about Niger
Mhm.
and the importance of the battle in Africa between Christian Africa and Islamic Africa, and Niger's right in the middle,
Mm.
and that's the battleground, and that's where God just laid it on my heart. That's where you're going to go, and so to go work with the Tuareg people, a nomadic camel herding
Yeah.
group up in the Sahara Desert, and that was a journey. And they told me when I went short term during my grad school that this ministry is a lot easier if you're married. And I was single at the time, and so that was a bit of a challenge for me. And it was just one where you start to say, okay, God, you got to provide somebody, not just somebody who can come live in the Sahara Desert. What's interesting is that he led me to someone that I'd known from high school, actually,
Okay.
and who was in university to be a pianist. She was in a piano performance degree, and I was thinking, okay, yeah, hauling a piano around on the back of a camel, it doesn't,
That might not go so
God's
well.
not working out so well here. But anyway,
Mhm.
God brought us together, and God really moved in Lori's heart, and we ended up getting married and went out, and that's what we did, for almost 20 years,
Mm.
working in West Africa and doing all kinds of things. I mean, it's a very poor country, underdeveloped, all kinds of challenges. And so, we just worked in anything that would give us an avenue in order to open up to be able to show the love of Jesus and explain the hope that we have in Jesus. And so did agricultural stuff,
Mhm.
literacy work,
Yeah.
health work, like I say, just a variety of things. And and through that, we are seeing, it's slow, but we are seeing a church emerge amongst that people
Wow.
group, which is really exciting.
That's really incredible, really exciting there, and I'm always thankful for your time in Niger because that makes for many great stories and classroom discussions.
Yes.
uh, okay, but I'm curious. Thinking about another aspect of your life. More recently, you brought it up, the dart thing, Samaritan's Purse. I should ask you a bit about that. Would you mind explaining what's going on there? And I know you were recently in Syria. Was that right?
Mhm.
I don't know how much you can share, but I think it'd be fascinating to hear if you've got a story or two, kind of explain what's going on here. What's this summer side gig?
Yes. Well, and it started not through me, it started through my daughter.
Yeah, yeah.
After college, she ended up working as an intern. And kind of an interesting story. She went to Greece to help with, at that point, it was Syrian refugees coming out. And they were in Greece, and Samaritan's Purse was there working with these refugees, and she was an intern.
Mhm.
And then, because of kind of a visa problem that they had in Greece of exactly where she would fit, they said, "You don't really fit." And so Samaritan says, "You can either go home or you can go finish your internship in Iraq." And my daughter, being my daughter, she said, "Oh, I'll go to Iraq." And so she went there, and that started a journey. She went there to
Yeah.
finish her 6-week internship and stayed 5 years. And that's how she got connected to it. And she started doing the disaster relief
Mhm.
trips, and she was on one in Moldova, and because of the whole Ukraine, that was one of the largest, I think to date, that still is the largest response that Samaritan's Purse has done. And they were running out of their volunteer list. And my daughter was a team lead there, and she was like, "I need this kind of a person." And they said, "We don't have anybody left." And she just told her leaders, "Well, my dad could do this job." And so they said, "Well, see if he'll come." And that was how I got in. And so that was my first one. And then I actually did the training after I came back. And the school here said, "Well, that's professional development because they will send me somewhere in the world. It'll be a new culture, it's new stories, it's new examples for the classroom." And so they kind of said, "That's as good as any conference you're going to go to." And so they have encouraged me every summer to put my name in with Samaritan's Purse. And you can't create it.
Yep.
There's no guarantees, but so far, out of 4 summers, I've gone 3 times
Yeah.
to 3 different countries and 3 different settings, 3 different kinds of crises that you go in to work with, and I have it. I've just found that it has been a something that keeps me current on the world of missions and just keep me thinking
Hmm.
about intercultural and dealing with new cultures. So it just helps me in the classroom when I come back.
Oh, that's awesome. Okay, just a few more questions for you here, Mike. We've got a look at kind of your past and the work you're doing in Niger and the way that God called you to that, some of the work you're doing over the summers here and stuff that's going on at Prairie. I'm curious, can you bridge the gap? Was there an inspiration? What was the thing that led you to come to Prairie? If you could give us that story right there.
Well, I'll give you my story into teaching actually
Okay,
as the
okay.
first part because I was in Niger and just thinking this is the job of my life and I love it, and even though it's hard and it's not the easiest country to be in, and yet I felt called there, and it's like this is the life I want. And then through a series of events that were coming up with and it had to do with my parents' health,
Hmm.
that we realized as I worked with my brother and we had discussions that, okay, mom and dad are going to need more help. And, who's going to do that? And it was kind of seen as like, okay, I think I could be going there. It was right at the time when our kids were going to be transitioning back to North America to start school, and they had never lived in North America. So that's a good time. And, my brother's kids were doing the same thing. And I thought, okay, we'll have somebody there that would be there for them. And then it was a school in Nebraska that actually asked me. I knew the academic dean, and he
Hmm.
said, "Would you ever consider teaching? Because about to make a change. We're going to need a new director of intercultural studies," and kind of saw all those things coming together. And it was going to be right where my parents were living, so we could help out with them. And so I left Niger saying, okay, that was 20 years.
Hmm.
It was great. Thank you, God. And now I will do something it's okay, but I'm sure it'll be fine. It won't be what I had. And I started to work with students and just realize how much I enjoyed
Hmm.
working with students that were interested in ministry and preparing them for ministry. And I soon realized it's like, wow, God did not ask me to take a step down. It's just horizontal. I just stepped aside to something that was just as exciting and fun as what I had been doing in Niger.
Yeah.
And so that got me into teaching. And as far as like coming to Prairie, it was not something that was on my radar. And yet, after my parents passed away, my wife's parents were here in Western Canada, and she was like, "Wow, if we could ever do something that would get us closer to them, that would be wonderful."
Mhm.
And so it was at that point that, all of a sudden this job hit my radar. And I thought, this is the kind of school I want to work at, the
Mhm.
kind of students who are preparing for ministry, and the history of going uh, into all the world, which, Prairie has just always had that.
Mm.
Uh,
Okay, well, maybe thinking of theology, but more personally, I think I'm going to ask you one more question here, and then we'll close it off. But this is a question that I love to hear from everyone that's on the podcast, and it's the question of what is God teaching you right now? And I think it's important for us to realize that we're never done learning, but also it's always this continual walk with Jesus, abiding with him, dwelling with him, and learning from him. So I'm curious, is there something that God's been reminding you of, encouraging you or leading you in recently?
or scaring me.
Convicting and
Yeah, the idea for me right now, it is, uh, I arrived here in right at the tail end of COVID, and so the program had been shut down in the heart of COVID because you couldn't
yeah.
travel, and so they didn't know if they were going to be able to start it up again until actually it was right about the week I arrived, and it's like, yeah, I think we could do Globe Trek
Mhm.
again. And I remember thinking, okay, so where's it all organized? And they just kind of looked at me and said, no, we haven't organized because we didn't know if it was going to happen. So we didn't start. And it's like, so I got 2 months to figure out how these people are going to travel all around the world. And that was one of those moments of just learning to trust God. It's like,
Mhm.
okay, this seems impossible, but God has it. Now, you fast forward 4 years later and there's still challenges. There's challenges every year in Globe Trek. But this year with adding the videographer, and, it's a major investment of time, energy, and finances
Yeah.
to be able to put together this multi-episode, sort of like an Amazing Race documentary of what Globe Trek is like. But I have no idea how to do that. I
Yeah.
have a great videographer who actually did Globe Trek, and so she understands that, and she's been doing video work now on her own as freelance for a number of years. And so she, I think she has the technical skills, but I know as I look at the whole thing, I'm the producer of this.
Hmm.
And it's like I have zero idea how to be a producer of anything of this kind of magnitude of a video production. And but that's what I'm doing.
Yeah.
And it's one of those things where it's like, okay, God, you got to show up here and you got to help me to be able to do what I don't even know what I'm supposed to be doing.
Hmm.
And and there's been things that God has just brought people into my lives. I had one or two people that I thought, okay, I've done stuff like this, and I'm going to go and grill them and ask them questions, and then just random people that I have met. And we start talking and find out that they have done this kind of documentary work before, and I can just ask questions. And it's like, what should I be doing? What should I be thinking
Hmm.
about? Right down to what kind of equipment do we need to provide in order to do this, and getting all kinds of that kind of information from just people that before this started I didn't even know. And it's just learning that you just keep stepping out on these limbs, and God just keeps meeting you there and
Hmm.
preparing that way. So I would say that's there. And
Yep.
you know, sitting here with you and talking about, I'm all excited about what God's going to do. Sometimes I wake up in the middle of the night and it's like, oh no, why? Why is this? There are those moments of doubt
Yep.
that it's like, this is going to fall flat on its face and it's going to be horrible. And then I have to remind myself, no, this isn't my
Hmm.
project, it's God's.
Yep.
And he's going to be there. So what am I learning? What am I wrestling and trying to learn? It's interesting because it's very similar kinds of ideas that I'm trying to teach the Globe Trek students, to be able to step out and meet God where he's at, so that, he'll meet those needs, and finding that God's putting me through a whole
The
level
same
of
thing. Yeah.
learning that same
Yeah.
thing, so that I'm teaching it and learning it at the same time.
Oh, wonderful. Well, thank you for sharing some of that there. Thank you for opening up, sharing some of those the lessons, the mixture of the fear and the sense that you have to step out there. Um, an important lesson, and I think just the lesson, you learn it in different gauges, different amounts, and now it's a newer area, newer amount for you there. So,
Yes.
thank you for sharing that, and thank you so much for coming on the podcast here, for sharing your stories, sharing a bit about your life and the work that God's done through you over the years, and what you're doing here now at Prairie. We're really thankful to have you as one of our professors. So, before we end this off, I'm just curious, do you have any final thoughts for our listeners? Anything else you want to get on air?
I think one of the biggest things that I would say to you is, look for this documentary on Globe Trek. I think whether you are looking as a prospective student that think, wow, could this be something for me? This hopefully will give you that image of what God does in the lives, not just the cool things they get to
Yeah.
do and see, but what does God do in their lives through that?
Awesome. And I agree with you. I think Globe Trek should be for a lot of young people and even old people too. They can try, but it's an adventure.
It is.
Okay, well, wonderful. Thank you so much, Mike, for coming on here. And for those of you out there, if you want to learn more about the Intercultural Ministry Program and what's going on here with Mike and his classes, you can check that out at www.prairie.edu. You can find the program there, and it shares a bit about Globe Trek and some other things. You can even reach out to Mike and ask him questions.
Absolutely.
So make sure you stay tuned to social media over the next year as we start talking about this Globe Trek documentary series and any other updates as well as podcast episodes. So thank you so much for joining us, and thank you, Mike.
Thank you.